Well, if you didn't know this going in, I have to point out that one of the main actors, Rory Kinnear, actually plays many characters. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to my channel. Today we're talking about a newer release, Men. Before we begin, let me know in the comments what your thoughts on this movie were, if you already saw it, or if you were planning on seeing it, and make sure to hit that thumbs up button if you like these reviews, as it helps me out immensely by getting my content out there. And if you're new here, I hope you consider hitting that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with more movie-related content like horror reviews on a near-daily basis. But let's not waste any more time, and let's talk about Men. This stars Jessie Buckley as Harper. In the aftermath of a personal tragedy, she retreats alone to the beautiful English countryside, hoping to find a place to heal. However, someone or something from the surrounding woods appears to be stalking her. What begins as simmering dread soon becomes a fully formed nightmare, inhabited by her darkest memories and fears. This is written and directed by Garland in his third feature film behind the camera after Ex Machina, which I absolutely loved, as well as Annihilation, which I really liked, though maybe not quite on the same level as Ex Machina. But he's still one of those directors that anytime he's got something new out, I'm immediately excited for it. Whether you love or hate his movies, you can't deny that they're ambitious, even if on a smaller scale, and they explore intriguing ideas and concepts through heavy genre elements. And this sees him move away from his usual sci-fi roots and pivot towards folk horror territory with this fairly small-scale film that tells a much more personal story, once again with many thought-provoking themes, though with more fantasy imagery this time around. Not that I classify this as a straight-up fantasy movie necessarily, but it contains a lot more allegorical elements than either of his two previous films. And it results in arguably his most divisive movie yet. Not that it doesn't have its fan base, as it was still positively received critically, but unlike either Ex Machina or Annihilation, this is probably his least mainstream movie to date. Annihilation had an ending that definitely ventured a little into the avant-garde that some people didn't like, but I'd say for the most part it was still pretty accessible. Men, on the other hand, you can argue is not all that accessible. But while unfortunately it's my least favorite of Garland's 3 directorial efforts, it's still a movie that I liked, even if not quite on the same level as either of his 2 other films. So, to get into the positives, as usual for Garland, the way this is shot is immaculate. Garland is great at staging really eerie, effective horrors and thrillers, and once again, he nails this creepy atmosphere needed to unnerve you through some beautiful shots. The one scene most heavily advertised in the tunnel in particular was one that really got under my skin, as did the scene we got as a result of that sequence. And the movie was effective at producing a very unsettling vibe while also telling a really personal and thematically rich story. Now, as I've said, some of the best horror movies are those that use its genre elements to tell something very personal and something that can translate to the real world. And this is another movie that generally tries to do something in that vein, at least for part of the film. Over the course of this, we see Harper thinking back about her unhappy marriage as well as this tragic event she experienced not long before the main events. Meanwhile, she has a frightening run-in with someone early on in the film, which also shakes her and also causes her to think back even further on certain major moments from her past. And as she navigates her way through the town over the course of so many days, she encounters all these different men, all played by Rory Kinnear, who either brush off her concerns, talk down to her, attempt to justify any sort of emotional trauma she receives, or speak to her in outright vitriol. The primary character Rory Kinnear plays is Jeffrey, who's the owner of the house Harper's staying at, and is obviously the first man she encounters upon her arrival. And while he tries to keep his interactions with Harper pleasant, you can tell through subtle moments in the dialogue that he does kind of look down on her. He makes rude remarks that he quickly tries brushing off as a joke, or he sometimes implies Harper can't handle herself, or whatever else it might be along those lines. And everywhere Harper goes, every other man, from a police officer to a vicar to a young boy and some really freaky CGI, they all look like Jeffrey and all echo similar sentiments of degrading her, but to varying degrees. And this is a stylistic choice, as Harper never actually says anything regarding this. This is strictly something for the audience to show that no matter where Harper seems to turn, she gets a variation of the same response, and emotionally, they all make her feel the same. While there are clear differences in the way in which one of these men will will respond to Harper recounting some emotional trauma from her past or from the situation she encounters. They all embody toxic masculinity in some way, shape, or form, which speaks to the primary themes of the film. And it shows how there are even seemingly positive interactions that can still embody that toxic vibe. Again, you especially see that through Jeffrey in the way that his cheery disposition masks someone who feels he always needs to be some sort of knight in shining armor for Harper. Like, there's even a moment where he and Harper are in a pub and she goes to buy a drink, and not only does he just offer to pay for her drink, but he insists after she tells him no like 5 times until he essentially forces her to let him pay for it. It's a subtle moment, and it's not one that's played up as a huge dramatic beat or anything through the rest of the scene, but it's still an effective sequence both on a thematic and a story level, as getting just one glance at Harper's reaction says everything we need to know. She still gets that same view that she got from the other men, that they make her feel like she doesn't have her own agency, and it's just another thing that doesn't help her deal with some already stressful recent events. And Jessie Buckley is phenomenal here. It's a very quiet role that requires her to be very reactive, but she's still very effective, as similar to the pub scene I just mentioned, in each of her little subtle moments, a simple facial expression of her taking in what just happened provides a lot of emotional weight to her character arc through most of the film, especially in its exploration of grief. And I found Buckley's performance to add so much gravitas to the character. And then Rory Kinnear is also excellent as well, giving us numerous performances that all feel distinct from one another. Outside of his performance as this kid, due to its rather unsettling CGI, which may or may not have been done on purpose, his performances for each character he embodies feel so immersive that you can almost forget it's all the same actor. But he does an excellent job making each of these characters feel similar in their reactions to whatever it is Harper's talking about. But at the same time, they still feel like they all have their own unique personalities, showing just how powerful Kinnear's range is. And it's especially great because it just adds to the overall unsettling nature to the film. Even with interactions that seem like they're starting off on the right foot, for them to then just always find their way back to the same note that leaves Harper feeling uneasy makes the whole journey feel like something out of the Twilight Zone. Like, there's especially a moment when Harper encounters the vicar and she unloads a really traumatic event onto him, and at first it seems like he's going to be comforting, only for him to then just try justifying the traumatic experience Harper had. And while there are moments of blood and a little bit of gore, especially in the final act, that's not the film's primary source of unease. A lot of the horror elements come from the unease both our protagonist and the audience feel from just how scarily real these conversations can get. Also brought out by the great camera work that further evokes that sense of dread. But let's get to the final act, and I'm not going to get into any spoilers, but this is going to be the most divisive aspect of this movie, almost similar to how it was in Annihilation. While there's a surrealness to the first 2/3, it's still presented in a way where you understand exactly what it's going for with its more symbolic elements, such as how every man is played by Rory Kinnear. And it does a good job of not spelling things out for the audience necessarily, but still giving us enough to work with through its symbolic imagery to make its themes feel rich while also moving the story along. However, when it gets to that third act, it goes completely off the rails. Again, I'm not going to get into specifics regarding what exactly happens for those who haven't seen the movie yet, but all I'll say is a lot of the surrealist imagery gets cranked up to like an 11, and it moves into something that feels very obviously far removed from reality. It becomes purely allegorical in nature for a good 30 to 35 minutes, and not that I have an issue with movies that use anything symbolic, allegorical, or metaphorical to get their point across. The problem was I didn't feel completely sure what point Garland was looking to get across through all this specific imagery in this part of the movie, or at least as far as anything new. Now, some stuff did just kind of reinforce what we already saw thematically, just in a more heightened manner, so that much I got. But it didn't really seem like Garland further explored anything regarding said themes through this imagery. While it was utterly surreal and over the top in a fairly entertaining way, it just didn't further the narrative or the themes along beyond what we already got in a way. It honestly felt like the narrative mostly wrapped up at the 2/3 mark, and then we just got this one long nightmare sequence that, while unique and visually striking, it still didn't move anything along further outside of this one brief moment at the very end, and it just felt like something out of a fever dream, at least in my opinion, and it made me almost say, what was the point of all that? But I feel it's one of those things that's going to be left open to interpretation, as you may see all this surrealist imagery, and you might be able to take something away considerably more profound, and if you do, great. But for me, I didn't quite fully wrap my head around what the ending was completely looking to say, and that's what prevented me from loving this movie. Though at the same time, it's still definitely an ending that does invite you to watch it again, so once you know what to expect, you can examine the imagery a lot closer, and maybe then you can pick up on what you couldn't get the first time around. I know at some point I would like to actually do that, as I'm still a fan of Garland, and I know how thematically rich he generally is with his storytelling, so I would like to see if there was something more that I can gather from it. Men is going to be one of the most divisive Alex Garland movies to date, and it'll definitely be one of the more divisive movies of the year. I'd say most of the film does work, thanks to some impressive camera work, an eerie, unsettling atmosphere, great performances from Jessie Buckley and Rory Kinnear, and due to its exploration of compelling themes. However, the film then derails into something utterly surreal for its final act that didn't feel like it added anything further to what we already saw in the first two-thirds, feeling more just like this bizarre series of sequences that just hit some of the same few points over and over again. It's something I still look to check out again to see what I can pick up on in another viewing, though I still have to say, it is my least favorite of the three Alex Garland films that he's directed, and if you're going to check this out and generally aren't into stranger horror movies, just proceed with caution. Men gets a 6.5 out of 10. So let me know, did you see Men, or are you planning to see it, and what were your thoughts? Is this your favorite Alex Garland movie? Is it your least favorite Alex Garland movie? Is it smack in the middle for you? Let me know in the comments below so we can discuss. Also, if you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, and share it, and for more movie reviews and film discussion, please make sure to hit that subscribe button to stay updated. Thanks for watching everyone, and keep having fun with film.